All right, I think we are live. I'm just going to give it a second. Yes. Okay. Welcome, everybody, to Yissel Missile Productions channel. My name is Steven Yissel, and today we are going to continue our deep dive into Ed Leedskalnin and his Coral Castle. So, without further ado, we're going to jump right in. I'm using a new broadcasting platform today. It's called OBS, and it's a good companion instead of just relying on Zoom. And I get to show a little slideshow and myself here. How about that? So we'll be looking at chapters 6 and 7. So we will be starting from right where we left off. This was the last photograph that we looked at of the lady in a bathing suit on the crescent moon. And chapter 6 is A New Life for the Coral Castle. So we'll be jumping right in. And I see you beyond the box. Thanks for being here. Thanks for sharing everything out. So I did share to my Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. So we should be getting a few more people coming in here to enjoy this. But let's get right to it. Chapter 6. A New Life for the Coral Castle. With Ed's death, the castle's future was left in doubt. For his friends and neighbors, for the tourists and visitors, hearing about the amazing stone sculptures from the odd little man who built them was part of the charm of the place. Would Rockgate remain an attraction, or would Ed's many years of labor be consigned to the bulldozers? No one was sure. His death had been sudden and unexpected. The Homestead folks weren't sure what to do. Some hoped that the state would take the property and keep it open as a historic landmark. The First National Bank of Miami was named the executor of the will. Ed owned little other than the castle and the surrounding property, which he had bequeathed to his nephew, Harry Leedskalnin, who was living at the time in Detroit. Little is known about Harry, allegedly the grandson of Ed's brother Otto. The younger Leedskalnin had written to Ed in the fall of 1950 from Grand Rapids, a letter which many in turn have sparked Ed's own decision to write to Otto. Harry had come to the U.S. after World War II, in which he had fought in the German War, having been pressed into service as were a member of the Latvian men to bolster the failing German war effort. By the time the war ended, Harry was in a prisoner of war camp. He came to the U.S. in 1948 as part of the Displaced Persons Act, which allowed admission of war refugees, overriding government quotas. After coming to the U.S. as a displaced person, he read about Ed and the Coral Castle in a newspaper. According to some, in fact, he even visited Ed in Homestead in early 1951. Harry, however, was unable to take possession of Rockgate. He had no money to run it, or to pay the overdue property taxes due to the state. He was forced to surrender Rockgate Park to the state of Florida for sale to someone else. That someone else turned out to be Julius Levin, a wealthy 39-year-old Chicago jeweler who had retired to Miami in 1952. Man, there's a lot I want to say about that, but we're going to just keep on rolling. Harry and his wife, Mary, signed over the property to Levin on April 7, 1953. Harry would later die that year, perhaps from health issues related to his war experience. The deal was finalized on May 1st, nearly a year and a half after Ed left to go to the hospital. According to his obituary in the Chicago Sun-Times in 1990, Levin bought the property without knowledge that a neglected castle stood on it. In the interim, Rockgate Park had languished, It had not been open for business or cared for since October of 1951, and we have no record of how long Ed struggled with illness before boarding the bus for the hospital. By the time the Levins arrived, weeds had grown up around the stones. Wild vines spread like exotic spider webs over the walls, the chairs, the planets, and Ed's tower. The tropical plants, flowers, and trees inside and around the castle had flourished uncontrolled. Fortunately, the new owner fell in love with the place. Though he bought the property unaware of the incredible monument that occupied the corner of it, Julius Levin set out to revive and reopen Rockgate. He cleared the wild growth and landscaped the entire area. He planted bougainvillea and other tropical plants, giving the castle a natural splendor and it had never had before. He hired a neighbor, Frances Wilson, to run the place and employed her husband, Marion, to build a gift shop and entry area. It was Levin who hired Bodil Lowe to generate publicity for the castle, in the course of which she gathered many affidavits from people in Homestead and Florida City who were familiar with both Ed and the castle's history. Levin himself also interviewed many of the locals, collecting their stories and recollections about his new attraction. Wow, so this is all new information I didn't know. And there's a photograph here. It says, new owner Julius Levin loved Coral Castle and made many improvements to the grounds. It's kind of odd the guy bought the land and he didn't understand what was sitting on it. But, yeah, there it is. And he's from Chicago. What are the odds of that? I'm like, just like an eye's view out from Chicago here. All right, carrying on. Within the year, Rockgate Park was open for business again. The 1950s were a good time to be a tourist in the industry, particularly the Florida tourist industry. Gas was cheap, the economy was strong, and the average middle-class family could afford to drive to the Sunshine State anywhere in the East, Southeast, and Midwest. By the late 1950s, the new interstate highway system made that drive easier than ever. A Florida vacation became a familiar symbol for the country's new prosperity. New attractions sprang up to entice the throng of travelers, from the Caribbean Gardens to Busch Gardens to Cape Coral Gardens to Tiki Gardens, from Storyland to Florida Land to Treasure Land, from Silver Springs to Sunshine Springs to Weeki Wachee Spring, from Pirates World to Pioneer City, from the Miami Seaquarium to the Aquatarium, from Gatamora to the Florida Citrus Tower. The state brimmed with new entertainment centers that, even if they were offering similar bits of kitschy Americana, much were more elaborate than their roadside predecessors had been. Competition for the tourist dollar was fierce. Julius Levin needed to ratchet up the marketing of the castle to a much higher level. And he did. He replaced Ed's dowdy, broken English advertisements for unusual accomplishment with a good bit more pizzazz. Some locals may have complained about the commercialization of Ed's place, but others saw the need to add some oomph to entice tourists to keep the castle going concern. And keep the castle going a concern. A brochure from the early 1950s beckons in bold capital letters, "Visit the Coral Castle of Florida at Rockgate Park." Above a photo of a young woman in a one-piece bathing suit standing on Ed's crescent moon, her hands raised ecstatically above her head. Below the image, the reader is warned that your vacation won't be complete unless it includes a visit to the castle. On the back of the brochure, which includes a map to what is still called Rockgate Park, the reader learns that the Coral Castle of Florida was created for the love of a woman. The word romantic appears in a seductive cursive font at the bottom. The copy inside the brochure, which wraps around more photos of bathing-suited beauties, is similarly florid, trumpeting claims like it can be compared only to such wonders of the world as the pyramids of Cheops at Giza, the Stonehenge in England, and the Colosseum of Rome. End quote. This brochure is quite possibly the first published mention of the name Coral Castle. though at this point it's merely a descriptor for Rockgate Park. Soon after, however, the latter name was dropped and Levin officially christened the attraction Coral Castle. It just kind of breaks off there. A memorable, alliterative moniker that conjured images of tropical splendor. All right, we got some photos to look at here. So this first one, it says left to right, Francis Wilson, Julius Levin, and Bodil Lowe, who collectively operated Coral Castle from the early 1950s through the 1970s. So we got these three charming people that revitalized the property. So I'm not sure why it got overgrowth and whatnot. Probably Ed's health contributed to that, and then while the property was in limbo. So we got a 2-page spread here. It says a photo shoot at Coral Castle in the late 1950s. And, let's pause the slideshow here. And I will show you in a bigger format here. All right. So there's a lot more greenery, it looks like, here than what it is today. But this was after they picked out all the overgrowth, apparently. But yeah. I'll get used to this. All right. Back to the slideshow. There we go. Oh, we got one more. We got one more. All right. It says a model stands on the Florida table during a photo shoot in the late 1950s. And I don't think people can actually walk on this anymore. But I guess for promotional purposes, they were allowed to do that. Because that's for sitting and eating. That's the dining table that's in the shape of a heart. Or, no, that's the one that's shaped like the state of Florida. I was going to say the peninsula. Yeah, he has two different tables on the property. One of them's in the shape of the state, and one of them is in the shape of a heart. All right, so let's continue here. In ads from the 1950s, Levin molded a new marketing campaign around the catchphrase, quote, "Love turned to stone," unquote. One ad featured the face of a winsome young girl framed in a locket next to a drawing of the castle tower and the Polaris telescope. It captured both the romance of lost love and the power of the structure itself. Ed's long-lost Sweet 16 lived on. This campaign soon gave way to full-color advertisements and postcards in which even the stones were colorized to look pink, purple, and red. Tourists drawn by these photos were perhaps a bit disappointed to pull up to the castle and only find gray stones. And though it's unlikely that Coral Castle thrilled kids hoping to see alligators, parrots, monkeys, roller coasters, water ski stunts, and glass-bottom boats, Ed's huge rocks and the amazing story behind them brought in enough customers to keep the place going. The Miami Herald published several articles about Coral Castle in the late 1950s, including a striking black and white photo feature that included beautiful models perched on Ed's sculptures. The photo layouts make vivid the castle's charm and power in a brilliant light that Ed never quite captured with his brownie box camera. And the tone of these photos is much more inviting, frankly, without Ed looking stiff and dour in his black suit. The castle seems to be a lush, ancient temple of love, a place any traveler would want to visit. Levin soon developed a new business, which he called the Tropical Florida Vacation Plan. Based in Miami, where the Levins lived, the Tropical Florida Vacation Plan offered tourists a structured day trip to a number of attractions. They boarded a bus and visited Monkey Jungle, Parrot Jungle, and a few other attractions, including Coral Castle. Quote, He said people were more enthralled by Coral Castle than any of the other places, end quote, recalls Levin's daughter, Linda Leedskalnin. She also recalls that her father loved the castle and spent nearly every day there. The rest of the family often joined him on weekends. Leedskalnin remembers climbing on the stones as a child in the 1950s and watching tourists work their way through the tours. Her favorite place to play was the wooden shack behind the castle, Ed's living quarters from his Florida City days. Throughout the decade and onto the 1960s, Julius Levin continued to work on the landscaping and horticulture aspects of the castle. He devoted his best efforts to making Coral Castle more beautiful than it had ever been. He saw Ed's place as a unique piece of folk art and did his best to ensure it would be preserved. Unfortunately, he couldn't find a way to make the castle profitable. Family members, says his daughter, thought his obsession bordered on folly. Quote, "We thought it was crazy," end quote, she says. Quote, "It never made any money. If someone couldn't afford the admission, he'd let them in for free. The family kind of encouraged him to sell it," end quote. The unearthly charm of the castle captivated others as well. Mythmakers in their own right, who by the end of the decade had put Ed's place to use as the little man who could never live in the wildest dreams have imagined. That sounds weird. I'm going to reread that. The unearthly charm of the castle captivated others as well. Mythmakers in their own right, who by the end of the decade had put Ed's place to use as the little... Yeah, see, it doesn't make sense. Who by the end of the decade had put Ed's place to use as the little man could never in his wildest dreams have imagined. So I guess that just says others capitalized on the property because it was just so fascinating to everybody. Kitschy America by the 1950s was not only on display from the Florida roadside. The 1950s, in addition to the tourist boom, also saw an explosion from the movie screen. B-movies, which included fantasy and science fiction films that were often little more than excuses to show leggy starlets in skimpy bathing suits or skimpy futuristic costumes. One of those films was 1958's Wild Women of Wongo, directed by James L. Wolcott, which features leggy starlets running around in skimpy primitive costumes. The film is also notable for its music soundtrack, the same soundtrack that would later be used in 1959's Plan 9 from Outer Space, often picked as the worst B-movie ever made, and for the fact that it used Coral Castle as a setting for some of the scenes. Filmfanatic.org declared the title the best part of the movie. Quote, "The script and dialogue are inane, and there are countless laughably incompetent moments," unquote. In 1961, filmmakers visited Coral Castle again, this time to film Nude on the Moon, directed by longtime sexploitation auteur Doris Wishman. The movie tells the story of two American scientists who funded their own trip to the moon, where they find a tropical paradise inhabited by topless women. The erstwhile space explorers watched the moon goddess bathe in Ed's tub and sit on Ed's throne chair. Other parts of the castle function at various times as perches for the moon's half-naked female inhabitants. Glenn Erickson at DVDTalk.com warned people not to, quote, "confuse it with a movie," unquote. Damn! That's a harsh critic there. Alright. Okay, I'm going to pause there. I didn't know that this place was used in films. But I guess it's kind of expected. It's kind of cool. Alright, let's continue here. DVDverdict.com, on the other hand, pronounced Nude on the Moon, quote, "one of the best of the Doris Wishman nudist camp classics," unquote, citing, quote, "the indubitably bizarre surroundings, which look like a combination Mayan spa and Morlock granary," unquote. In 1966, director Herschel Gordon Lewis used Coral Castle as a setting for the children's film Jimmy the Boy Wonder. KittyMatinee.com called the film quote, some sort of evil LSD home movie for kids, end quote. In 1982, two low-budget Mexican films starring a then famous masked wrestler named El Santo, Rodolfo Guzman Huerta, who was 64 years old at the time, were shot simultaneously using a number of South Florida locations, including Coral Castle. La Furia de los Karatecas, or Fury of the Karate Killers, and El Puño de la Muerte, or Fist of Death. Though not as cringeworthy as the movies that preceded them, did not exactly earn the type of respect Ed would have wanted for his life's work. Yeah, that I gotta say, it's kind of cool that they have all these movies, but they're like all B movies and not in the best taste. But yeah, Ed probably wouldn't have been happy with that. All right, Coral Castle fared much better on the small screen, where it was presented seriously as a mysterious place worthy of the public's attention. It first appeared on television in the summer of 1957 on a popular show called You Asked For It, in which viewers sent in requests to see unusual and even bizarre people, places, and situations. The request to put Coral Castle on the show had come from Julius Levin himself, who hoped that national exposure would spark interest in his attraction. It's not a bad idea there, boy. All right. The castle next appeared, and most famously, on January 24th, 1981, when it was featured in an episode of In Search Of, a show hosted by Leonard Nimoy, best known for Star Trek's Mr. Spock. Man, this is just packing the punches here. I didn't know it was on there, too. All right. The half-hour documentary-style program ran from 1976 through 1982, each episode exploring a mysterious or paranormal subject. The episode on Coral Castle was titled The Castle of Secrets. As of this writing, it can be found in its entirety on YouTube. Hey! With its eerie soundtrack and Nimoy's stentorian voice, the show offers a number of captivating moments, even for viewers already familiar with the castle and its creator. Several locals from Homestead are interviewed, among them Francis Wilson, who Julius Levin had hired to run the castle, and Bodil Lowe, who had gathered all those affidavits for Levin back in the 1950s. Both agreed that Ed was a sweet, if mysterious, guy. All right. So I'm going to actually show this 2-page spread. All right. These are movie posters for The Wild Women of Wongo and Nude on the Moon. Let's see this first one. Untamed maiden captures their mates. Even us birds and bees are confused. And then we got this one. Man discovers a nudist camp on the moon. A truly different adventure, adults only. And the heavens brought forth the wonder of women. Okay. So there's that. Thanks for bearing with me here. All right. The show's producer neglects to mention that each was employed by the castle, but from the vantage point of the 30 years later, it's fascinating to put faces to the names of those associated with the castle's history. The show offers its share of faulty information, as well as a few dramatic reenactments that have little connection to the truth. In a scene recreating Ed's move from Florida City to Homestead, Bob Biggers leaves his truck and walks around the corner, only to turn back and see that Ed, in a matter of seconds, has already loaded his giant stones into the truck. Yeah. You see, you get that little, leniency with TV shows and film, but like, don't stretch it that far. Alright, let's continue. No one claims that Ed was able to move the rocks quite that fast. Much more powerful and believable are the show's attempt to demonstrate the enormity of Ed's accomplishment. A construction crew sweats and strains to cut a slab of coral rock while using a diamond-tipped power saw, a far more powerful piece of equipment than any Ed ever possessed. Using a 600 horsepower crane, the crew attempts to lift the freshly cut stone slab, which sags and sways in the air while nearly toppling the crane. Of course, with a single chain wrapped around the middle of the stone, the crew makes no attempt to use balance or leverage, but the demonstration does capture the difficulty and enormity of the challenge Ed faced in maneuvering such gigantic pieces. The most fascinating moment of the show, however, comes from watching footage of Ed himself. Taken from a home movie found in the closet of a local person, the footage, which is grainy and lasts only about 10 seconds, shows a picnic at what appears to be Ed's place in Florida City in the late 1920s or early 1930s. And Ed and his neighbors rock in the stone chairs. He points up at the obelisk, and then for a brief moment, the camera focuses closely on Ed. We see a boyish, embarrassed smile, and his hand brushes his hair away from his forehead. This fleeting image shows us for the first time the real Edward Leedskalnin, not the formal, rigid, unsmiling man he posed as in the pictures he took himself, but the one who his neighbors always described as gracious and genial. Joe Bullard, author of Waiting for Agnes, a fictionalized retelling of Ed's story and considered one of the cornerstone books on the subject, cites the In Search of episode as his introduction to Coral Castle. A native of Florida, Bullard was surprised to learn that such a mysterious place had existed in his home state. Quote, "After seeing it on TV, I was fascinated by the place," quote, unquote. Bullard says, quote, "I had to go down there and see it for myself," unquote. The trip he took from his home in northern Florida to Homestead changed Bullard's life. In Homestead, he met an elderly local man named J.T. Bullard, no relation, who told him many stories about Ed and the castle, some of which have already been mentioned here. Sparking the research he then spent years of his life doing before writing his novel. Other shows with formats similar to In Search of followed suit. Coral Castle was soon featured on That's Incredible and Unsolved Mysteries, along with several local programs in South Florida. Tour guides say that many of the castle's visitors, having learned of the place on television, decide to come and see it for themselves. The renewed attention gave the castle a new credibility, even among those who reject views ascribing supernatural origins and symbolism to the structure. Compared to Florida's Disney World, Universal Studios, and other mega attractions, Coral Castle may seem small and antiquated, but it also seems authentic, a startling and mysterious achievement created by one man through hard work over the course of many years. A truly, quote, unusual accomplishment, end quote. Yeah, it's pretty fascinating. I'll be on the box. All right, we're going to keep going. We're almost done with this chapter here. Got like 2.5 pages left. In a clear case of poor timing, Julius Levin sold Coral Castle just 10 days before the episode of In Search of introduced the entire country to this amazing place, transferring the deed to Coral Castle, Inc. on January 14th, 1981. In her father's Sun-Times obituary, Linda Liebsker suggests that her father had no regrets. Quote, "He didn't run it to make a lot of money," end quote. She says, quote, "He saw the artistic side of the place," end quote. The family had been telling him to sell it for years, and the financial concerns were raised in the press as early as 1966. Every attraction located south of Orlando had suffered after Walt Disney World opened in October 1971. You see that, you mother. Disney's going to be a different subject, but yeah, there's just that. Every attraction located south of Orlando had suffered after Walt Disney World opened in October 1971. As one frustrated motel owner complained, quote, "It was as if someone had built a wall across the middle of the state," end quote. When Levin's health began to fail in the 1970s, he decided at last that his family was right. Coral Castle Inc. maintains ownership today. In 1986, the story behind the castle received national attention from an unlikely source. Pop singer Billy Idol, who, having heard about Ed and his lost love, recorded a song called Sweet 16. Idol then filmed a video for the song at Coral Castle. It's difficult to imagine how Ed would have reacted to seeing a shirtless pop singer with dyed white hair seated in his throne chair. Perhaps he would have been delighted by the attention, or he might have fretted nervously about the castle courtyard, feeling that his property had been invaded by people who didn't really understand him. Or, less likely, he might have realized that he could have written a simple song to his Sweet 16 rather than devote 30 years of backbreaking labor to building an 1,100-ton monument for her. We'll never know for certain. No, I think Ed was convicted with building that thing, so I don't think the idea of a song would have really done anything. All right. Continuing on. Coral Castle is today on the National Registry of Historic Places, ensuring that it will be preserved despite continued commercial and residential growth in the area. Ed's masterpiece is safe from the bulldozers which, throughout the years, have dismantled many of the once popular roadside attractions in Florida that competed with Coral Castle for the attention and dollars of tourists. Not even Mother Nature has been able to harm the place. On August 24th, 1992, Hurricane Andrew, a Category 5, hit the Florida coast and demolished most of Homestead. It was one of the strongest hurricanes in American history and absolutely devastated the area, except for Coral Castle, which did not budge an inch. The gift shop admission area was wiped out, as were most of the buildings in Homestead, but the castle itself remained, for the most part, unperturbed. A tall palm tree collapsed onto one of the outer walls, cutting a 6-inch scratch on the coral, but no other damage was found. In fact, the castle became a support station of sorts for the cleanup operation led by Bravo Company of the 307th Engineers Battalion, 82nd Airborne Division. The engineers even camped on the castle property. For you history buffs out there. The only real damage was done by someone in the days after the hurricane before the army arrived. A looter, or curious scientist, used a chisel to cut through the rock to break open a latch on the second floor of the tower in Ed's living quarters. The New York Times quoted caretaker Thomas Lowe, who said, quote, "With all the force and everything of a hurricane, it took human beings to do this. That makes me mad," end quote. The sheer thickness and weight of the walls were more than a match for Hurricane Andrew. The porous texture of the oolite probably helped too, allowing some of the wind's force to blow through. As homesteaders surveyed the devastation of their property, they must have looked in envy at Ed Leedskalnin's house, which stood proud and tall, unchanged, unharmed. It still stands now. It will, in all likelihood, stand forever. And there is another image here at the end of chapter 6. And I will show it to you now. It says, Hurricane Andrew devastated much of Dade County in 1992, but Ed's castle remained unharmed. So I think what we're looking at here is most of the Just like damage around Homestead. Yeah, ain't that something? Oh, we got another photograph here. It says the mysterious Edward Leedskalnin. Yeah, that's definitely from the cutout that I stood next to. The cardboard cutout. And these negatives must have been huge. Alright, we're going to just keep on rolling. We're going to go and start chapter 7. But if you have any questions, just ask me in the chat here. I'll see it. So chapter 7, Mysteries and Secrets. And I will get my slideshow going again here. Okay. The internet today hums with the talk of Coral Castle and Ed Leedskalnin. Most of it centered on the methods Ed used to construct his masterpiece. Many conjectures exist, and the proponents are zealous in their beliefs. Following is a roundup of the most popular hypotheses. This is the good stuff right here. There are overlapping aspects to some of the arguments. They're not mutually exclusive. Ed's ability to defy the laws of gravity, for example, appears in a number of them. The energy grid theory, meanwhile, is sometimes associated with UFOs and with magnetic current. Keeping them all clear isn't easy. At the same time, it is easy to be swayed when reading each one, because when nothing is known, everything is possible. Some ideas, however, do seem less likely than others. The theory that states that Ed's grandfather or uncle met an old wizard in Latvia, for example. According to this argument, the wizard knew the long-lost secrets of megalithic construction, secrets perhaps passed down from the Druids of Stonehenge or the Egyptians of Giza. He gave this knowledge to the Leedskalnins. This theory, however, does not consider why only Ed, of all the Leedskalnins, acted on the wizard's teachings, and then only after 10 years of hard labor in America. Though it's difficult to put much credence into this idea, there are others worth considering more seriously. The first of those is known as harmonic levitation. In 2007, the London Telegraph published an article about research then happening at the University of St. Andrews in Scotland. Scientists there were briefly able to reverse the Casimir force, a theory in quantum physics that explains why atomic particles stick together. In the article, science editor Roger Highfield explains, quote, "The force is due to neither electrical charge or gravity, but the fluctuations in all pervasive energy fields in the intervening empty space between the objects." I'm going to read that one more time. The force is due to neither electrical charge or gravity, but the fluctuations in all pervasive energy fields in the intervening empty space between the objects. End quote. Two researchers, Ulf Leonhardt and Dr. Thomas Philbin, have used a, quote, special lens, unquote, to cause the Casimir effect. Quote, to repel rather than attract, end quote. Researchers at Harvard University and National Institute of Health reported a breakthrough in somewhat similar experiments in January 2009 edition of Nature International Weekly Journal of Science. In this study, the scientists were able to switch the Casimir force from attraction to repulsion through the use of fluids. In his article, scientists used quantum mechanics to levitate microscopic objects. In the January 8, 2009 edition of the Tech Herald, science writer Rich Bowden reported, quote, the team led by Federico Capasso, the Robert L. Wallace Professor of Applied Physics at Harvard School of Engineering and Applied Science, has yet to demonstrate the levitation, but is confident the discovery will lead to the phenomenon. Quote, when two surfaces of the same material, such as gold, are separated by vacuum, air, or a liquid, the resulting force is always attractive. End quote. And we have a photo here before we move on to the next page. Yeah, this is the stuff I wanted to get to from the get-go. So it says, levitation has always been the stuff of magic shows and fantasy, but did Ed Leedskalnin master the art in real life? And this looks like just a postcard of the time showing levitation from a magic show. See that on the bottom there. All right. Yeah. This is what I've been wanting to talk about. How Ed built this place. All right, let's continue. However, when one of the two surfaces immersed in a fluid was replaced by one made of silica, the force immediately became repulsive. So let's go over that one more time. When two surfaces of the same material, such as gold, are separated by vacuum, air, or a fluid, the resulting force is always attractive. However, when one of the two surfaces immersed in a fluid was replaced by one made of silica, the force immediately became repulsive. And you could say it'd be levitation. End quote. And after repulsive there. I was adding my own thoughts. All right. These breakthroughs suggest that a levitation that does not break the existing laws of physics, is indeed possible, albeit levitation on the quantum level. There are those who believe that levitation is the method by which Edward Leedskalnin was able to raise and precisely maneuver the massive coral rocks with which he built his castle. They draw this interference from a story that began circulating at some point during Ed's years in Florida, one that was eventually quoted by author Frank Joseph in an article he wrote for Fate magazine. The story, retold in Fate, declares that one night some local teens snuck up on Ed and were able to actually witness him working on the castle. They saw him levitating the huge rocks simply by singing to them. I got some chills just reading that. A man named Fred Bullard, no relation to Joe, mentioned previously, was one of those kids. He told his daughter Sharon about the experience years later. So there we go. We have a first-hand account that Ed sang to the stones to move them into place. Ain't that something? All right. Let's continue here. According to some, the phenomenon those Florida teens witnessed is known as harmonic levitation, a process in which a certain sound pitch allegedly nullifies the gravitational pull on an object, allowing it to float in the air. The process sometimes is attributed to Tibetan monks who are said to have mastered the art and allegedly used it to float large rocks in the air and then move them to higher places. One of the better known case studies is reported by Swedish writer Henry Jelson in his essay The Lost Techniques. Jelson writes about the experience of his friend, identified as Dr. Jarl, who lived for a short time more with a group of Tibetan priests. Jarl testified that he witnessed chanting while beating on drums tuned to various pitches. After several minutes, the sounds caused rocks to lift into the air. And I'm going to read that one more time. Jarl testified that he witnessed chanting while beating on drums tuned to various pitches. After several minutes, the sounds caused rocks to lift into the air. The parascientific explanation of harmonic levitation is pretty simple. The condensed vibrations within a sound that achieves a certain pitch nullify the gravitational pull on an object, allowing it to break free and rise into the air above the surface on which it had rested. To achieve the levitation, the sound must achieve a certain frequency within a specific distance from the object. In a documentary posted on YouTube, longtime Coral Castle guide Ray Ramirez speculates that the partially enclosed redemption corner at the castle may have been where Ed stood to hear and judge the frequencies he generated to cause the huge stones to lift into the air. Others have theorized that the black box located at the top of the tall tripod from which Ed rigged the block and tackle used in constructing the castle may have contained frequency tuners that produced the tonal pitch necessary to reduce or eliminate gravitational pull, thus allowing Ed to lift the rocks and move them with equipment that otherwise would not be capable of the task. If the story of the Homestead teens is true, perhaps what they assumed to be Ed sinking to the rocks was actually the sound of the tuners, creating the frequency that would cause the rocks to float into position. I want to believe the teens story before they try to muddy it up with the technology here. Like, if the first-hand accounts they're seeing him sing, and then that's what they saw. All right, let's continue. No evidence exists to confirm this theory, either about the box atop the tripod or about the validity of harmonic levitation. But the recent discoveries referred to above, discoveries made by mainstream scientists, suggest that levitation is no longer merely the stuff of science fiction stories. Ed might have been far ahead of his time, and ours as well. So we have another photograph here in the book. It says, Ed works the chain on his tripod. Note the mysterious black box at the top, which some theorists believe holds the key to Ed's true methods of moving the stones. So we got this thing here. Now, I think he partially did this for show, because he didn't let anybody see him work. So why would he have that? Other than to just try to pass off that he's just a normal guy with no knowledge of whatever he knew. Huh? That's my theory. Okay, let's continue. And we're getting close to the end of the chapter. Well, not really. Oh, we got about 10 pages left. But there's some photographs in here, too. Another possibility is that Ed, in building Coral Castle, had access to techniques created by ancient societies that, through time and conquest, have since been lost. One intriguing theory is raised by a writer-researcher named Jim Solly in an essay titled On Proving Ancient Megalith Construction. Solly proposes that the pyramids and Coral Castle were built through the use of what he terms, quote, ancient cement, end quote. He points that by focusing on the difficulty in moving huge monolithic stones, theorists cannot solve the mystery. Instead, he says they should question whether or not the stones truly are monoliths, meaning a single piece of stone. Solly believes that the Egyptians and Ed created the multi-ton stones from smaller, more manageable stones. By using cement, they could build the stones after they had placed them in position. He writes, quote, "Coral stone is one of Ed's many deceptions. It seems only to be an innocently convenient building material indigenous to the area, but it's not. It is rich in calcium carbonate, the primary chemical compound used to manufacture modern cement." What? No. Solly goes on to say that Ed's experience as a stonemason and also in the labor industry would have taught him how to make wooden molds into which he could first pour his cement and then shape his stones. Much is made of the fact that no tool marks appear on Ed's sculptures and walls. That's false. You'll see in some of these later pictures. I'll point it out here. Okay, are we good? Alright, I think we're okay. OBS was giving me a problem. Beyond the box, yeah. Yeah, you could sing, you could levitate everything then, huh? Okay, so this is all still the same quote here. So I'm going to continue on. Solly goes on to say that Ed's experience as a stonemason and also in the lumber industry would have taught him how to make wooden molds into which he could first pour his cement and then shape his stones. Much is made to the fact that no tool marks appear on Ed's sculptures and walls. That's a lie. Solly believes that any carved stone would exhibit some marks, but that if instead Ed used molds and cement, then no tool marks would be seen. He declares, quote, "As virtually no one who visited the castle would be impressed by missing tool marks, it is far more probable that missing tool marks is a byproduct of his technology than he deliberately spent time ensuring that he left no tool marks," unquote. Solly's theory certainly explains one of the greatest mysteries of the castle, the 9-ton rock gate that turns with the touch of a finger. Recall that to create this piece, in the estimation of modern engineers, Ed had to not only find the perfect center of balance, but then, with the primitive tools available to him, drill a perfect hole through the 8-foot-high stone as he fed a metal shaft through it, balancing that shaft on a pie-shaped rock that acted as a fulcrum. And he had to do all this while keeping the 9-ton rock suspended in the air. Solly suggests that Ed created a wooden mold and filled it with cement and placed the shaft into it. When the cement cured, the shaft stood in place and the hole around it was perfect. For those who doubt that Ed's pulleys and hand tools could have created coral castles, Solly's theory of the rocks being filled or put together with some type of binding agent, which Solly calls ancient cement, could be the answer. Another possibility involving forgotten technology is demonstrated by a retired carpenter in Flint, Michigan, named Wally Wallington, who is currently in the process of erecting his own Stonehenge. Having spent 35 years in the construction business, he developed a technique of inserting stones beneath a heavy piece and then using them as fulcrums. Wallington has found that moving and placing giant stones involves finding the stone's center of gravity and understanding basic laws of leverage. He places 2 round stones approximately 19 inches apart and uses them as alternating fulcrums. On his website, www.theforgottentechnology.com, Wallington explains, quote, "I found that the heavier an object is, the easier it is to balance it. Since mass has to obey the laws of physics, it resists movement, and once it is set in motion, it resists change. Also, once a weight is close to balance on a single point, rotation can be initiated and the object becomes stable. The more weight, the more inertia, the more stable. Therefore, the heavier the better. Additional weight or leverage is used and can be shifted so the weight can be balanced on more than one fulcrum. For horizontal movement, the fulcrum is also a pivot. Since leverage is not used under the object, it does not interfere with motion. In classes of levers, the lever is always on the contact with the fulcrum, input, and the load. When I am using leverage or weight as input, it only comes in contact with the load, and the load rests on the fulcrum. Therefore, the load is my lever, end quote. In a recent newspaper article, he adds, quote, "The levers to move the stones of Stonehenge are still there. They are the stones themselves," end quote. Wallington declined to be interviewed for this book, preferring, like Ed, to maintain his privacy. But unlike Ed, Wally has explained his method in detail. He has, in fact, posted a video showing that method in action on his website. Videos from other news agencies are posted on YouTube as well. In these videos, Wally is seen pushing around 10-ton cement blocks with ease and even cantilevering them to stand upright. He is not a stonemason and makes no attempt to sculpt the heavy pieces, but watching him work allows us to imagine Ed using similar methods in the creation of Coral Castle. Other than the alleged undocumented report about Homestead teens who witnessed Ed levitating the rocks, the notion that Ed had somehow employed supernatural powers to create his castle seems to have begun after his death. Neighbors at the time thought he was a skilled craftsman, a genius, a nut, even a spy, but none publicly bestowed upon him otherworldly connections. Newspaper articles published in the aftermath of his death in the 1950s and 60s make no mention of such ties, except one. The first public conjecture of Ed's involvement with aliens may have been made in 1959 by occultist George Williamson, who wrote and lectured about the existence of UFOs. He and his colleagues published books in the 1950s claiming they had contacted UFOs, usually through the use of a Ouija board. A small article titled "Coral Castle Holds Secret of Saucers" in July 20th, 1959, edition of the Miami Herald announced that George Williamson, quote, "a noted scientist," end quote, would be giving a lecture at Miami's New Age church. The article, which appears without a byline, went on to detail Williamson's claim, quote, that the principles used in creating Coral Castle might be the same as those which power flying saucers, end quote. Williamson also compared the castle to, quote, ancient Inca walls in Peru, end quote, noting, quote, both Leedskalnin and the ancient Incas may have known the secret to the same magnetic force that possibly powers unidentified flying objects, end quote. Whether or not this article sparked visits to the castle or to Williamson's lecture is not known. Speculation about UFOs and about space exploration was quite popular at the time, particularly after Russia launched the Earth-orbiting Sputnik space satellite in 1957. Science fiction movies, novels, magazines captured the country's imagination. The Herald article describes Dr. Williamson as, quote, an anthropologist who has written several books and is listed as an expert on American Indians by Who's Who. He said he became interested in unidentified flying objects in 1947 when he found the descriptions of sightings were similar to those of many Indian legends, end quote. The article most likely was taken from, that they just gloss over that part. I want to hear these Indian stories about flying saucers. All right. The article most likely was taken from a press release announcing the lecture and was written by Williamson himself or by someone at the New Age church. In fact, he was neither a doctor nor an anthropologist, nor, quote, a noted scientist, end quote. To appear in a Who's Who, one simply must pay for a listing. In his, Williamson apparently bestowed upon himself a doctorate and a background in anthropology. His short academic career actually ended in 1951 when he flunked out of the University of Arizona. Williamson provided a somewhat dubious beginning to Coral Castle's legacy of supernatural speculation. The theory that aliens were involved in the construction of the earthly structures received much more favorable and widespread attention in mainstream media a decade later through the work of a Swiss author, Erich von Däniken. And actually, that's a very good guy to research. Erich von Däniken. I'll spell it out for all you. EricVonDaniken. That's 3 words. Erich von Däniken. In his best-selling books, especially Chariots of the Gods, first published in 1968 and made into an award-winning documentary in 1970, von Däniken proposed that some of the Earth's ancient mysteries could be accounted for by the presence of, quote, ancient astronauts, end quote, from outer space. For example, those astronauts, he suggested, may have taught the Egyptians how to build pyramids using ancient alien technologies, much more sophisticated technologies than any culture on Earth possessed at the time. The, quote, ancient astronauts, end quote, theory received renewed attention through Rod Sterling's 1974 television special titled In Search of Ancient Astronauts. 1974. Didn't think they went back that far with the ancient alien stuff. Alright, let's continue. When asked how he built the castle, Ed had often offered the cryptic reply, quote, I know the secrets of the pyramids, end quote. Those who share von Däniken's beliefs conclude that Ed, as well, had the benefit of alien technologies to aid his efforts. Kind of makes sense when he claims that. Those beliefs are given to a certain amount of credence through the pie-shaped stone in which Ed's 9-ton gate balanced for more than 40 years. Questions such as where that stone had come from and how such a small rock, approximately 12 inches in diameter and not more than an inch or 2 thick, was able to balance 9 tons without crumbling over 4 decades, have provided substance for all kinds of theories over the years. An alleged analysis by the geology department at the University of Florida concluded that the stone was of, quote, unknown origin, unquote. And that is the University of Florida saying that the stone is of unknown origin. The pie stone on the bottom. Did that conclusion from the esteemed university mean it was not made of a substance found on Earth? We contacted the geology department at the University of Florida to confirm the report of the lab analysis, but did not receive a reply. Author Joe Bullard said in our interview with him that he has experienced similar resistance from the school. Again, those mothers. Alright. Edward Leedskalnin was never a man to do things on a small scale. Coral Castle provides evidence of that. So too does the pamphlet he published in 1946, Magnetic Current, which we will be going over in detail here after this book. The statements he made in its pages were bold and unwavering. The textbooks, Ed declared, were wrong. He had come up with a new way of understanding such significant concepts as gravity, electricity, and magnetism. Though complex, some would say indecipherable, Ed's theories had at their heart a simple premise. He believed that the Earth had a magnetic core and that everything on it, animal, vegetable, and mineral, was made up of magnets, which each with North and South Pole. The magnetic pull of the Earth's core on those poles was responsible for what we know as gravity. Ed explained, quote, the North and South Pole individual magnets are the cosmic force. They are the building blocks of nature's perpetual transformation of matter, and they are so small they can pass through everything, end quote. Therefore, to break the law of gravity, one merely had to change the polarity of an object. In looking for explanations of how Ed was able to move around multi-ton blocks of coral with ease, many stopped their research here. They believe that Ed somehow found a way to reverse polarity of his huge stones, causing them to float in the air and come to rest precisely where he wanted them. He created, in short, an anti-gravity device. What did he use as a source of power to reverse that polarity and then sustain it long enough to lift and place the rocks? The answer to those who favor this theory is obvious. The perpetual motion machine he refers to within the magnetic current pamphlet. The device he allegedly attempted to receive a patent for. The device that, according to some, drew the attention of federal officials during the height of World War II. This perpetual motion machine may have been his magnetized flywheel, connected to a reciprocating motor that he kept the wheel turning and the magnets polarized. No such motor is displayed in Ed's tool room, though it's possible that it was stolen after Ed's death, which the castle sat vacant for many months. The flywheel today contains no magnets. It is simply a rusted gear with a handle. In a well-known photo, Ed holds the handle and appears to be turning the flywheel. If he needed to continue cranking the wheel to keep it in motion, how did he then use the current it generated to move the stones? Even Ed couldn't be two places at one time. But if he had discovered a way to keep that flywheel perpetually in motion, he could have used it to power his system. Perhaps Ed did intuit a new way of seeing some of the forces that hold our world together. Perhaps his theories, properly understood, would advance the understanding of electromagnetic phenomenon. During the 1940s, when he was studying the subject, much work on it was being done. The ideas of Albert Einstein and Nikola Tesla sparked exciting new research, opening up possibilities that had previously seemed merely the stuff of fantasy. Anti-gravity was one of these ideas. Ed may have been swept up in the excitement and begun expounding and experimenting on his own. So we got some more photos to show. Alright, yeah, I think we're doing okay so far. Yeah, there was just a little hiccup with OBS. It said it disconnected, but it seems like it didn't, so it's good. Alright, so we got one page of a photo here. It says, Ed cranks the handle on his flywheel, which he called his perpetual motion machine. This is actually pretty interesting to look at. So there he is. And there's the perpetual motion machine. Looks like a giant gear. And that looks like him a little later in life. And then another photo, it's of Tesla. It says Ed is sometimes compared to another outlaw theorist of electromagnetism, Nikola Tesla. So we get a little shot of Tesla there. Okay. So we're going to continue on. We are still on chapter 7. But we are making our way through. And I hope you're enjoying the photos here too that I took while I was on my visit in February 2023. All right. A quick tour of the internet reveals many who believe that Ed did indeed make significant breakthroughs in electromagnetic theory. Two researchers at www.leedskalnin.com have even begun attempting to duplicate Ed's experiments in magnetic current. A number of thought-provoking articles have been written in support of Ed's claims. One of the best is, quote, The Incredible Mystery of Coral Castle, end quote, by Christopher Dunn, who concludes, quote, I have no doubt that Leedskalnin told the truth when he said he knew the secrets of ancient Egyptians. End quote. Brian Dunning at www.skeptoid.com remains, not surprisingly, skeptical. On his website, where he posts a popular podcast, Dunning, a science journalist, states, quote, I've read Leedskalnin's pamphlets on magnetism, and to me they're quite childish, end quote. In a personal interview, he added, quote, Ed was using scientific words without any sense of what they mean. He believed that he had great knowledge, but anyone who reads it knows that he doesn't know what he's talking about. It's just gobbledygook. He is asserting that every natural science is wrong, but it's certainly not something that he proved in any way, end quote. When asked if Ed's theories would be more deeply investigated, Dunning responded, quote, there's no plausible foundation for anything he says. It doesn't encounter anything in Ed's books that seems to be worth investigating, end quote. Well, that's a fucking buzzkill, dude. Why even approach it? All right. Some would say the same of Ed's other published work, in particular a booklet he titled A Book in Every Home, which I have, and we will be going over, which through it contains nothing remotely resembling pseudoscience or the supernatural in its pages, is as controversial among some of the castle's devotees as any of Ed's other writings. Published in 1936 by the Homestead Leader Enterprise, A Book in Every Home is divided into 3 sections: Ed's Sweet 16, Domestic Life, and Political Life. The text is skimpy, to say the least. Ed fattened the booklet by putting a blank page next to every one he wrote. As he explained, Reader, if for any reason you do not like the things I say in this little book, I left just as much space as I used so you could write your own opinion opposite it and see if you can do better. You gotta love that. That is awesome. That's a power move there. So there's another photograph of him here. I gotta read that one more time. The text is skimpy, to say the least. Ed fattened the booklet by putting a blank page next to every one he wrote. As he explained, Reader, if for any reason you do not like the things I say in this little book, I left just as much space as I used so you could write your own opinion opposite it and see if you could do better. So this photograph says Ed holds his self-published booklet titled A Book in Every Home, probably sometime in the late 1930s. The contents of the booklet invited such commentary. Some of his ideas are disturbing, to say the least. For someone who was always described as shy and sweet-natured, Ed revealed a startling rigidity throughout the booklet. His views on love and romance are revealed as surprisingly stern, sometimes even frightening. He began the pamphlet with an explanation. Quote, Now I'm going to tell you what I mean when I say Ed's Sweet 16. I don't mean a 16-year-old girl. I mean a brand new one. End quote. All right. Ed goes on to explain that he wanted a girl who was pure and sweet, who had never been with another man, and never had been in love before. Quote, as soon as a girl acquires experience, the sweetness begins to leave her. End quote. He, for one, would not have a girl who another man had already, quote, soiled, end quote. And he doesn't mean simply that he wanted a virgin. He wanted a girl who had never been in any type of relationship at all. Quote, a girl is to a fellow the best thing in the world, end quote, he writes. Quote, but to have the best one secondhand, it is humiliating. I will put gunny sacks on before I will wear another man's clothes. And this is only a step from having another fellow's girl. End quote. How, though, to keep a young girl brand new? Ed advises mothers to, quote, pose as an experimental station for that fresh boy to practice on and so save the girl. End quote. All right, I'm just going to keep on going here. These views had the genesis in the old country, no doubt. Perhaps they were acceptable there, but in America, where women enjoyed considerably more freedom than in rural Latvia, they would have been seen as backward, to say the least. And whether spoken or simply held to himself, they would have made it considerably more difficult for Ed to find a girl he could spend time with, let alone marry. Writer Agnes Ash, in February 13th, 1966, article in the Miami News titled, quote, The Little Man Who Moved Mountains, unquote, made that very point. Quote, It is safe to suppose that Ed missed the mark as husband material. He was undoubtedly stubborn, domineering, self-righteous, and a painfully unwavering perfectionist. In many ways, Leedskalnin was as unyielding as the coral rock, which was his favorite medium of expression. End quote. Ed's views on politics, appearing later in the same booklet, were similarly rigid. Quote, It is not sound to allow the weaklings to vote. Anyone who is too weak to make his own living is not strong enough to vote, because their weak influence weakens the state. End quote. He continues, quote, All people are independent, so you see everybody will have to take care of themselves, and if they cannot, they should perish, and the sooner they perish, the better it will be. End quote. So he's a survival of the fittest type of guy here. In the essay titled Domestic, Ed's ideas come across not so much as frightening as surprisingly mundane. He admits that the first thing he notices about people, quote, is if there is something wrong and if it could be improved, end quote. His pointers focus mostly on physical appearance, mostly on the mouth. Ed advises that when one smiles, one should be careful to show only teeth, not one's gums. Girls especially should be cautious so that their mouths don't look too big. They should avoid smiling too widely. Mothers should train their children to control how widely they open their mouths, and, quote, children should not be encouraged to smile too much. Smiling in due time will produce creases in the sides of their mouths, end quote. Even when taking into account the fact that Ed is not writing in his native language, his ramblings throughout A Book in Every Home are so strangely convoluted and pedestrian that some people believe they are coded messages. Okay. A man of Ed's genius, these doubters contend, surely must have been able to offer more sophisticated views of life and human nature than the ones printed in this book. A final group of theorists believe that Ed drew the power he needed to raise the coral rocks he quarried in Florida City and Homestead from the earth itself. They posit that... hold on. I'm sorry. I did not realize I didn't have the slideshow going. There we go. They posit that Ed tapped into what is known as the energy grid, made up of lines called ley lines, the intersection points of which marked not only Coral Castle's location, but the location point of other megalithic monuments, such as the Dragon's Triangle off the coast of Japan, the megalithic temples of Baalbek in Lebanon, and the Moai Heads on Easter Island. Author Bruce Cathy, as mentioned earlier, believes that Ed's decision to relocate to Homestead was driven by a desire to take advantage of the powers inherent in the grid. Ed, he believes, quote, new secrets that some of our scientists would give their right arm for, end quote. New Age occultists share similar beliefs. They claim that the lines denote sources of telluric energy, which is especially powerful at points of intersection. Those who believe in Ed's connection to von Daniken's ancient astronaut theory link the ley lines to places visited long ago by extraterrestrials. All these theories, as mentioned earlier, overlap. People tend to find in Coral Castle its existence and its symbols exactly what they want to find. Those who believe Ed used magnetism will point to the placement of the rocks as proof that they stand on ley lines. Those who believe Ed was somehow linked to the cosmos or was from outer space or somehow using the castle to communicate with extraterrestrials see in the stars and planets scattered throughout the grounds proof for their beliefs. Ed's interest in astronomy is obvious as well, though the shapes he used display no unusual language of the subject. One frequently cited misnomer is his use of the six-pointed star, which many observers have called the Latvian star. It's not. In fact, there is not a specific star symbol for Latvia. On some of the country's military medals, an 8-pointed star is used, but it is not known as the Latvian star, and it does not resemble the stars I'd placed throughout the castle. Some countries do make use of a 6-pointed star, including the one above the eagle's head on the Great Seal of the United States. Some observers have made that connection and see its use as a sign of Ed's patriotic feelings toward his adopted country. Ed's 6-pointed star sometimes are seen as Masonic emblems, providing Ed's involvement with a secret society. Others note the use of 6-pointed stars by the early Egyptians and by the Druids, and thereby conclude that Ed was sending a message about his connection to those groups. Still others see it as a sign of witchcraft. The star also is interpreted by some to be the Star of David, proving that Ed was Jewish. Now that's a wild theory right there. Some feel it is drawn from Ed's belief in the old pagan religious customs of Latvia, collectively known as Dievturi. Truth is, nearly every religion from Christian to Muslim to Hindu and every culture uses some form of 6-pointed star. Ed might have been referring to any or none of them. Inspiration for the star motif used throughout the castle might simply have come from the lights he saw in the night sky while he worked. As a universal symbol, the 6-pointed star or hexagram is usually interpreted to mean the union of the male and female, the yin and yang. It holds with it the 4 elements: earth, air, fire, and water. Ed believed in the unity of all things on earth and wrote about magnetic connectivity. The star could have appealed to him as an expression of these beliefs, if only on a subconscious level. Ed also made frequent use of the trilogy motif: the 3 planets, the 3 phases of the moon, the 3 adult chairs in the throne room, the 3 bears grotto. This motif is archetypal. It exists in many religions and cultures. To find proof that Ed was drawing from any one religion or culture when using them isn't particularly difficult or particularly illuminating. These symbols and others like them are so basic and universal that they can be inserted into virtually any iconographic scheme or theory. Ed put a great deal of thought into his masterpiece, obviously. Given the size and the difficult texture of the pieces, he would have spent weeks or more on a single one, allowing him plenty of time to think about what feelings or meanings he wanted to evoke with it. But his work suggests broad, timeless, universal themes rather than subtle ones. The pieces hark back to his boyhood in Latvia, to celebrations of the natural world, to the changings of the season, and the stages of the moon. These themes interested and delighted Ed, and in his amazing sculptures, he hoped to delight those who came to see them. Ed's Coral Castle is a monumental piece of folk art reflecting the joys, sorrows, and obsessions of its creator. The book Gardens of Revelation by John Beardsley offers one of the most insightful descriptions of the castle. Beardsley focuses on the castle as a work of art and sees Coral Castle very much as a reflection of the man who created it. He writes, quote, "The fortress character of Leedskalnin's environment reveals his ideas about independence, self-sufficiency, and the protection of property. He created a fiefdom in which he could be the undisputed lord. The walls would protect him and his property from being dirtied by the outside world. It is a fantastic horticulture, architectural, and sculptural environment that embodied Leedskalnin's cultural ambitions. And though we may find his political and domestic views a little dated, we can take comfort from the fact that he was innocent of any real power over others. We can celebrate Leedskalnin's work while being relieved that his opinions were forever contained within his walls." End quote. We got a photo here of the front door. That's all it says, but it is in color. So this says ring bell. AJ Wild, good to see you. All right, so we got a 2-page spread here. On the very next page, it says the courtyard. That's a really nice photograph of it. And I'll get in here close so you can see it a little more clearly. Yeah, just imagine all the time he spent, 35 years doing this. And that he moved locations, that like this is the second location of the thing. And here we got more pictures, the telescope, 2-ton wall. And we got a bunch of yeah, the end of this chapter is just a bunch of pictures now. So we got the telescope and the 20-ton north wall, and the moon fountain. So the telescope here. And then on the other side, here's the telescope again. 20-ton north wall. And the moon fountain. And then we have Ripley's Largest Valentine, the 5,000-pound heart table, and the Florida table complete with Lake Okeechobee. And then the 38-foot, 28-ton obelisk. So we have the heart-shaped table here. Just in time for Valentine's Day, huh? And then the Florida table, complete with Lake Okeechobee. So I guess the lake is that little bowl thing there. And then we have 38-foot, 28-ton obelisk, which is I guess the original one that was over in Florida City that he had moved over here to Homestead. Got a few more photos. The crescent moon and the planets. These are actually really great to have in the book. Because if you don't have like the photographs that I have, that I took when I went, then you don't have too much to have reference on. Then we have the carved freshwater well, Ed's cooker crock pot, and 16 steps to Ed's tower home. So the carved freshwater well. So that's what we were like trying to figure out earlier on one of the last live streams I did. So it is a water well. An Ed's cooker crock pot. And then his stairs up to his living quarters. Which I believe they're still there. Unless they did something a little different. It must be closed off at this point. Because I didn't get to go up there. And then we have more photos. Ed's bed, which hangs from ceiling cables. Got the tool room and the generator, aka perpetual motion machine. So here is Ed's bed. Just hanging from the ceiling. Kind of wild there. Then we got the tool shed, which I also got more pictures of myself. And then the perpetual motion generator. Which I would like to find out more about. Then we have the throne chair, the sundial, and the 10-ton gate. So here's the throne chair. There's the sundial. And the stone gate. You can see the fencing around it now. Since I guess it is not balanced anymore after people probably messed around with it. And one more photo, and then we will be wrapping up reading the rest of the chapter here. This is the crescent moon with the moon in the background. Hey, Jason. Oh, wow, Jay Wild, you finished all the TA stuff, huh? And I'm glad you stuck through it and watched it all. It's a lot of information with that. I really tried to be thorough with Tom. And I might have gotten a little too thorough. Spooked him off. I ain't done yet. If you go to Beyond the Box YouTube channel, I talked a little bit more about what I think's going on now. But I am not done talking about all of that. It's going to be in another time, but I will be getting to it at some point. After I get all my notes together here. Because I got a lot of them. And a script. Oh, we'll be looking at some script stuff. Okay, we got one page left. Then I got 2 pictures, and it is it for today. So let's continue. Ed grew up in the shadow of the castles and the German barons that no doubt were embedded deeply in his memory and imagination. His friends, family, and neighbors lived and worked at the whim of these barons without power and without the ability to significantly change the course of their lives. When the opportunity arose, Ed built his own castle and became the baron, using the special skills he had developed. He remained an outsider so that the inside of his castle walls he could maintain in control. The walls protected him just as he protected himself from everyone around him. Everyone who knew Ed recalls that they really didn't know him. He maintained his distance from them. Within that distance, Ed retained his power. He wrote that scientists did not know what he knew. All the school books were wrong and lacked his understanding on a variety of subjects. He scorned romantic relationships that did not meet his standards. Stories are told of Ed's fear that the government wanted his knowledge of magnetic currency. They wanted to steal his generator. He would not give it to them. Instead, he died without revealing his knowledge. Even the visitors who paid the admission fee to the castle would hear what he wanted them to hear and when he wanted them to hear it. For Ed, Coral Castle was above all a place of safety where a little man with a little money could live alone and yet feel powerful. People may disagree on the meaning of his creation or the methods he used to build it, but there is no denying the scope of his achievement. The sheer scale of his creation demanded respect from others. From this respect, Ed drew power. In his own mind, he too was large and powerful, and his castle demonstrated that power for all the world to see. A complex man, he imbued his masterpiece with innocence and wonder, with cleverness and romance, building a place that reflected the many sides of its creator. And we got 2 more photos to wrap up chapter 7 here. A view of Coral Castle courtyard in the 1950s when speculation about its supernatural origins began to catch the country's attention and imagination. It looks completely different. So it's probably from all the overgrowth. It just looks like a completely different place. Yeah, like all of these plants here. There's the Florida table. So it got really overgrown after he passed. And then finally, we have a picture of the entrance. With the plaque outside that says you will be seeing unusual accomplishment. So there you go. And for the next part, we will be, let's see here. Acknowledgement, notes, epilogue. Okay, so we'll do chapter 8 and the epilogue for next week. And really, it's not much left to go. But that's that. That completes chapters 6 and 7 for today. From, again, the book Coral Castle by Rusty McClure and Jack Heffron. Once we are done with that, we are diving into these. And these are books that are mentioned in this book here. But I got these all from the gift shop at Coral Castle. And we're going to go through it all. Because we got the time to do it, we're going to do it. I don't know anybody else who's like gone into all of this stuff. Yeah, I think it's nap time too, Brenda. Hey, I kept it under. It's like 20 minutes shorter than last time. How about that? Yeah, Jay Wild, thank you for being here. I really appreciate it. I I love covering stuff that I feel is important. I really, I mean, I've grown up wanting to pursue filmmaking, and I have done so, and I continue to strive to do more projects. But like just right now, it's not financially possible. Like, how do you do a feature film? Like with 400 grand, you get a whole crew of 100 people, and gotta feed them every day, and plan out like 40 days of filming. Like doing a proper feature film, it takes a lot of money to do. But if I could shoot it on digital, might as well. But yeah, I really like focusing on all the entertainment stuff. So I really was shocked to know that like Coral Castle was featured in several movies that I've never watched. So I'm gonna have to go back, write down those names of those films, check them out. Maybe I can make some clips and show them here in one of the later parts that we do in the upcoming weeks. Because we're going to be having at least 3 more parts, considering we got 1 book, and then 2, 3, 4, possibly 5 more little things to go through. And we could couple up some of them. Like, we don't have to separate them out that much. But I think this is a good way to space it out so that we don't get exhausted. And, I did 23 parts with Tom Althouse, so if you guys just blow through that like it's nothing, then you're going to also enjoy watching and listening to the rest of this Coral Castle stuff. But yeah, there's a link for Beyond the Box. Yeah, just type Beyond the Box. It's in the one of the Madness Hour descriptions. So go to my older videos, the ones that say Madness Hour, the very first one. I think it has Brenda's Beyond the Box link in there. It'll take you straight to her page. And yeah, I'm on that show with Brenda weekly. I become like a weekly like guest / co-host in a way. But it's Brenda's show, Brenda and Susie's show. But they talk about a lot of cool stuff, and that interests me, so I think they're cool people, and we all get along. And yeah, I saw one of you mention the Titanic here, so I'm just gonna wrap up talking to all of you here. Oh yeah, Jay, the Higher Side podcast has a Titanic episode. Insurance scam theory like 9/11. Yeah. Yeah, I've heard it was a different ship. There were sister ships. There's actually like multiple sister ships. Like they were making ships in pairs. And Titanic was one of those pairs. And the Titanic was actually the older ship. And that the newer one was given to the military or something like that. Yeah. Yeah, Brenda. Shopping with Steve. I go and look for I go look for diecast and other collectible stuff. And sometimes I sell it on my eBay store. But that's another thing. Yeah, we'll get into that. We'll do something on it. We'll probably cover it on Beyond the Box, but I'll try to cover it here too. Like I said, after this deep dive, I want to deep dive into other topics, and I don't want to do like multiple ones all at once, because then it's just like my mind's going to be all over the place. But I'm able to focus just on Coral Castle here for the meantime, and I feel comfortable doing that, especially since it's been about 2 years now since I visited. And I'd been meaning to look at all this stuff, but never made the time for it. But now I can dissect all of this and read through all of this here with all of you. And you guys get to see another side of the world and history and all. Just I don't want to say mysteries, but it is a mystery because we don't know how Ed went and built this thing. So I do I do really think he used sound levitation. One of the things they didn't mention in the book yet, and I don't know if they'll get to it since we're on the last chapter, but those teenagers that saw him singing to the stones, he was holding what looked like ice cream cones, like little cones. And that was something that Michael Tellinger, another researcher, had mentioned, which is how I found out about Coral Castle. That he was holding these little things to go and move the stones around with it. So that part is not in the book, but somehow Tellinger found out about it. So maybe it's going to be in some of the pamphlets here. But we will find out. So next week will be chapter 8 and the epilogue, and we will finish that book. And then we'll pick one of these. We'll pick out one of these things. I think we'll start with the Enigma of Coral Castle since it's one solid thing. And then we will go into Ed's books in here that Ed published himself. And we'll see what he has to say. And then if I could find those movie clips that have Coral Castle in it, I can show it on here. Yeah, Brenda, it is sad thinking about Ed's story. When I was reading the opening on the first one, I mean, it got to me thinking about that. But it's also a good story of conviction. We don't know if it was really the lost love that made him continue on with the work, but he ended up sticking to what he believed he should do, and he followed through with it. So I think that's honorable in itself. But yeah, I guess we all could use a little more love, right? Be a little more forgiving of others in a way. All right, I'm done being all up in the romance part of all this here. But yeah, Ed seemed like he was a very eccentric guy, and he did leave a legacy, which I think is what he planned to do with all of this, and it almost got overgrown by nature, but it's withstood that Hurricane Andrew in '92, which is very impressive. You're gonna dig him up and marry him? Oh man, Brandon. Well, again, thank you, Jay Wild, Jason H, Brenda, Beyond the Box. You guys are awesome being here today. And I see we got more than just those three here. So I really appreciate you all being here. And next week, Tuesday again, I will have a scheduled show because I was able to do this through OBS. And it's a lot better being able to schedule the show ahead of time so all you know that it's coming up instead of me just popping on live as what I've done for like the past 2 years. But you'll see it, and I'll get the link out if you guys are following me on TikTok or Instagram, Facebook. I'll put it up in the story the day that I go live like this, like today. So again, next week, Tuesday, hopefully at the same time, 2 p.m., we'll be doing chapter 8 and the epilogue of the book, and then we'll be getting into the pamphlets. So I appreciate y'all being here, and until the next one, class dismissed.